Well, welcome. I'm glad, I hope it stopped raining by now. I can't believe somebody said that it was raining. I want to thank, and of course she's not here because she's probably still in the kitchen, but Marie Half, who, when we were planning the America 250, Salem County has a planning committee, and last year when we were talking more, I talk louder, okay, when we were planning out all the activities that are going to happen this year, and there's things going on every month. In March, which is Women's History Month, we said, okay, let's spotlight a female from Salem County that's important. And Marie immediately jumped up and said, Rachel Davis DuBois. And at the time, having read her autobiography and seeing the picture in our social room, I kind of knew who Rachel was, but not at the level of doing a presentation. So we've spent the last couple of first day schools sharing anecdotes. There are people in the meeting, Chris and Jack actually interviewed Rachel at one point. We've got people that knew her personally, which we've got people in the audience now too, which is great. And so the idea is to just kind of do, and there's Marie herself. I just gave you credit for the content and the idea about doing Rachel. But the idea is to kind of give a brief chronological review of Rachel's life, and it was packed. But also to go and intersperse personal anecdotes and remembrances. So we've got some folks that hear from Woodstown, and I'm hoping there are others in the audience who either knew Rachel or have memories of Rachel and will share as well, because this is the first time we're doing this presentation, but we're also going to do it for the public on the 29th. That's part of the America 250 celebration. So I encourage everybody to come back if they want to hear it again, but thank you. I think probably the best way to start is to go right to the source. So.
Was the first right there?
I didn't know that. Where were you born?
Happened to be born on a farmhouse near Clarksboro, but my parents only lived there for about 2 years because it was the home of my mother's mother. But then they soon moved down there in a farm near Woodstown, so that's where I grew up.
Woodstown, they were members of Woodstown Union? Mm-hmm. And it must have been considerable time ago. It must have been, well, you would know about Woodstown from what they told you, I guess. Were they both members? Both birthright members? Mm-hmm. So you come from a long line of Quaker?
As far as we know, the Davises were always Quakers, and they came from 4 Quaker young men who came as farmers from Wales in 1699. They first went to Long Island, but somehow didn't like it there, or I don't know why, but they, in 2 or 3 years, moved down to Woodstown. And these 4 brothers from well, I guess it was William Penn at that time had a lot of land on this side of the Delaware as well as on the other side. So these 4 brothers got 700 acres between them. I don't know what they had to pay for it. And when my grandfather came along in the middle of the 1800s, he got 150 acres near Woodstown, and that's our Davis homestead.
Was that part of the original 700?
Mm-hmm. And the other Davises, of course, Bill Waddington, for instance, is a second cousin of mine, because his mother was a Davis, the first cousin of my father. So,
well, most of them were related, I guess.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of Davises, not just those Davises, but many others around South Jersey. But those are the people who came over. We don't know too much about them. But they were always farmers.
And since it was close to Woodstown, I presume they were all members of Woodstown Union. How much the plain speech, did you?
Oh, I grew up in that. I would no sooner say you to my mother than call her a fool. She would say, "What's the matter with thee?"
Danny purposely wanted to get to the point of the interview when we got to that. You're into the plain speak. Okay, so Rachel Davis DuBois, January 25th, 1892 to March 30th, 1993. An American educator, human rights activist, and pioneer of intercultural education. One of the things with Rachel, though, is whatever her accomplishments and activities that she did throughout her long life, she always accredited the deep roots here in South Jersey and her Quaker upbringing to all her accomplishments. She gave total credit to those two things. Even her nephew, Ed Davis, talks about when she had moved to New York City for a while, she would go and after visiting the family here in Woodstown, she would bring back soil from South Jersey to go and put in her New York City garden for the plants. I mean, had to take care of that. She talked about being born in her grandmother's farmhouse, and one of the things from the very beginning was that it was kind of realized that Rachel was something special. And the story goes in the family that as soon as she was born, the nurse midwife actually took the baby up to the highest point in the farmhouse, because they always expected her to be high-minded. So she would reflect on her act of pacifism and the development of her concern on the eradication of racism was a result of her Quaker upbringing. She remembers meeting for worship where there was a reading of queries, which was, when differences arise, do you speedily endeavor to end them? Do you live in that life and power which takes away all occasions for war? So, as I said, Rachel, they lived outside of Woodstown, but went to school here in Woodstown. She went to the Bacon Academy, which the Quaker school was off of Elm at one point. Sometime before she actually graduated, it was taken over by Woodstown itself as their public high school. So she officially graduated from Woodstown High, and in 1909, she was, she had an aunt who, this is kind of an interesting thing. She was a seamstress, and the aunt decided that Rachel needed to go to college. And that was something a little unusual. That wasn't something that was done a lot for women or men. And so the aunt, who was a seamstress, knew of a family in Woodbury that she had worked for that had sent a daughter to Holyoke. And she said, well, that's where Rachel's going to go. Well, unfortunately, they didn't accept the Woodstown transcript. So they would require her to take a battery of tests, and Rachel said, oh no, that's not going to happen. So there was another family that the aunt was familiar with who sent their daughter to Bucknell, and they would accept the Woodstown transcript, so that's where Rachel ended up going. As you know, Bucknell was a Methodist University college, and there was a question about a year later about why this good Quaker girl was going to Bucknell, and the short story is they gave her a scholarship. Swarthmore didn't. So she stayed at Bucknell. Again, this story and everything, and I'm going to give credit to the Salem Quarters Tape Revival Project, and I'm probably going to refer to it quite a bit because not only the oral histories, but the archives, her autobiography, there's been a lot of, she was a voracious authoress, and there's a lot of people who have written their dissertation. I'm going to talk to Dr. Christmas there, but other people as well. So when I talk to, I'm trying to differentiate between, what I heard directly and what was written about. So following graduation, Rachel went and took a position at Glassboro High School. And this is right during World War I, which was a little problematic for Rachel because at the time, teachers were required not only to encourage the students to purchase war stamps, but also to purchase them themselves. And that was something the pacifist Mr. DuBois was not about to do. So actually, she was still a Davis at the time. So she got a special dispensation from her principal not to have to purchase them. And she got very involved around the same time with the newly formed Young Friends movement. She attended the meetings over in Pennsylvania, PYM, and she would travel to different meetings to discuss pacifism and her concern with the war. At one point, and there was a group of these young friends, they got up to the Farmers Fair in Trenton, and they had with them this large papier-mâché dinosaur, And as the crowds walked past during the fair, and I'm reading this so I get it right. Ladies and gentlemen, this animal is now extinct. Why? Because he put all his energy into scaly armaments while his brain remained the size of a peanut. Therefore, our country should not enter into war and spend its energy or its money on huge armaments, but on education. So this is a young teacher there with her papier-mâché dinosaur. And she eventually did buy a war bond, but it bothered her to no end. It was one of the things she kind of rationalized by saying it was for the boys, but it was something of concern. One of the things, and this is when I apologize, the history buff gets a little better of me. One of the things I found out was there was such a decimation, the men that left to go fight the war. And there in Glassboro, the one paper they had in town lost their editors and lost, running the paper. So the school board decided to take over the editing of the Glassboro Enterprise, the only paper in town. And the students would come in on Monday morning and bring in stories from their communities. The business class would type up the paper. The English department would edit it, and some students even learned typesetting. The faculty wrote the editorials. So this was kind of I just found it amazing that this is what's going on when everybody's decimated, left for the war. But after World War I, Rachel was selected to represent PYM at a London meeting of young friends. And it was held to rethink the peace testimony. She had an opportunity to listen to Quakers from, I guess, all over the world at this point, but definitely the country. And she was really surprised at hearing about everything that was going on at the different organizations. However, she was absolutely horrified when listening to the AFSC founder, Hollingsworth Woods, talk about the race riots that were happening back in the States. She realized that in 4 years of high school and college, she had heard nothing of this. So she realized, and this is her words, that she didn't have the proper worldview to teach. She felt that she needed to get better exposure. So she left her teaching position in Glassboro and became involved with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. This involved taking numerous trips down to Washington. She went and immersed herself in national and world affairs. She traveled with Jane Addams over to Europe after the Versailles Treaty. There was a discussion about how that's really not maybe as good as it could have been. And the group worked to address the injustices and cruelty placed on oppressed people. One of the things she also did was she was sent to go down to South Carolina, Aiken, South Carolina, and look into the Quaker school. It had been started by a Quaker from Bucks County after the Civil War, and she wanted to study what was going on in that school. To say that she was mildly surprised at the Jim Crow South would have not done justice to that. She was absolutely horrified. I'll use that word again. She was not prepared for what she came across. You've got to remember, Rachel, growing up on a farm outside of Woodstown, obviously there were a lot of farm workers, but Rachel and siblings were out in the fields planting corn right along with the farm workers. This isn't something that they were separate from. There was a story that she went and there was a African-American farm worker, couldn't read or write, but had a sweetheart back in Virginia. And so Rachel would sit at the kitchen table with this gentleman and write letters back home to his sweetheart. Just think about that for a little bit. She was sitting at a table with an African-American. We're talking about the turn of the century. And now she's sitting being exposed to the Jim Crow South, where you've got signs and segregation and all sorts of good stuff. So this was not something she was just blown away with. She also, while she was down there, and this is going to be one of these things, and Jack warned me when I was starting to rattle this off, that there are a lot of people that Rachel, this network of people. She was a networker before the term started. And one of the first people she met was George Washington Carver, who later on sent peanuts up north for assemblies and all sorts. She never lost track of anybody she met, let's just say that. But she was, again, horrified to realize she had no concept of the contributions of African Americans. This was something brand new to her. So she gets back to Philadelphia, and she recommends to AFSC that a committee on race relations be formed to overcome the negative attitudes, not only from the community at large, but also within the ranks of Friends. She has some difficult questions, one of which is, if Friends schools are so liberal, why are there so few, if any, students from African American and other backgrounds attending? So she was, even at a young age, asking the pointed questions. So after 3 years, she decided she had enough experiences that she was prepared now to teach. So in the fall of 24, she accepted a position at Woodbury High. She's gotten married at this point, living in Pittman. And this is what I think the career of the intercultural educator and activist Rachel Davis DuBois starts. And this is just kind of a little bit of background. I'm going to digress a little. To set the stage, in the 1920s, there was a rise of anti-immigration sentiment in the United States. We had the Immigration Act of 24 that set quotas on national origin. The 20s and 30s saw race riots, lynchings, and other forms of violence targeted at ethnic and racial minorities. The intercultural education movement, which is what Rachel's associated with, promoted bringing together ethnic and racial groups in a way that promoted, through a greater understanding of each other, not just tolerance, but equality and mutual respect. She emphasized bringing groups of people together to discuss issues and learn about one another in order to break down barriers. And I hope you saw the little quote there as you walked in the door. She saw intercultural education as leading to healing and reconciliation across race and religion. She was very involved with not only the racial component in different cultures, but also the Jewish as well. It would ease tensions in areas where groups were ignorant and fearful of each other. And by the late 20th century, intercultural education evolved into multicultural education, which I think is what we hear now, which shifts to empowering all marginalized groups. So, back to Woodbury. At the time, the Woodbury board or whatever had established a series of weekly mandatory assemblies, which were probably not all of the greatest quality and of interest to the students, unfortunately. The teachers were required to stand during these assemblies and kind of try to keep the unrest at a minimum. And at one point, the speaker that they had brought in got so frustrated with the exuberance, I guess, of the students, probably not the right word, but he stopped in the middle of his presentation, sat down and said, "I can't do this anymore." So the story goes that the principal turns to Rachel and says, "You do this?" And she said, "Of course, if you let me do what I want to." And he said, "Of course, I trust you, do it." Now Rachel reflects later that, of course, there was no pay increase with this additional duty. There was no, well, we'll give you some extra time during your day, few other classes to take this on, none of that. And she was also probably too young to even ask about that kind of thing. So she took on this, very excited, and school year ends, and she goes and plans a trip out to California, to Oakland, where one of her friends from Bucknell was teaching at the time. Now, this is going to get now into the network of Rachel. As she's going across country, she realizes that the NAACP is having a meeting in Denver. So of course, she stops and and she goes and meets W.E.B. Du Bois, who becomes a lifelong friend, although they did establish that there's probably not a direct link between her husband's family and his, but possible. Langston Hughes, the poet. She then gets involved with folks who later on would introduce her to the Southern Martin Luther King and his movement, but that's 20 years forward. She gets out to California because, again, this is another movement that's quite involved, is the Workers' Union. The IWW, the International Workers of the World, Wobblies, had just had a lot of people incarcerated because of their rather socialist views and some of the worries about organized labor as a whole. So she decides to go and, of course, go to the prison where one of the leaders was incarcerated, James Price, and meet with him as well. So I don't know, every once in a while I just kind of, as I was reading this stuff, just blown away with, of course, this is what you would do. So she gets back to Woodbury after the summer and her travels, and she gets together an assembles a committee of like-minded teachers. This is, what she was doing was not unique to Woodbury and Rachel. There was movements to get this cross-cultural education going in several different places. Pennsylvania had a couple of teachers doing that. And so what they did was they planned out the year's worth of assemblies, and they were going to happen in pairs. The first part of the assembly, first day, was going to be a speaker. Louder? Okay. Yes, please, if you're not hearing me, point at me or something. Would go and speak about their culture, represent their organization. And these weren't people that were just kind of off the street. She went and got Pickens, who was the, wait a second, I want to give him his official title. I think he was the secretary for the NW, yes, Dr. William Pickens, who is the field secretary for the NWCP. She would get the director of the China Institute. She got the first Italian-American Common Pleas judge from Philadelphia. This was the caliber of speakers that she would bring in. And then the second part of in a couple of weeks, she would have students that represented that cultural or religious organization to go and put on another part of kind of the poetry, the music. She always was very tied in with the dramatic side of things, the presentations. So this is going along fine. They would tie in the assemblies to a particular holiday. So in October, Columbus Day, this is when the Italians would come in. December, they would have the Germans, Christmas, come in. And in February, with African American, it was History Week at the time, not the whole month. She had Dr. Pickens come in, and he was very well received. He spoke for the assembly and hung around the school for the whole day. He basically was very well received, a great enthusiastic result. So they were proceeding along with planning the next assembly when the kids were getting involved, and the principal comes to Rachel and says, it's been canceled. The board met last night, there's been concern, we weren't going to do that. And in addition, they are going to ask you to voluntarily resign because of the issues. So she was a little flummoxed at the point, but the principal, and I got to give him credit at this point, and I believe that is the dad of the gentleman that you were just hearing interview Rachel. They talk about that later on. Again, these South Jersey connections. But he said, first of all, do not voluntarily resign. The board will have to, in open court, prove that you're an unfit teacher and that also you're morally corrupt, which was kind of a big thing at that point. The war had ended, and so there was all this thing about people who were pacifists at the time that had signed maybe oaths that were against the war and this and the other thing. So he said, and also, bottom line is, New Jersey now has tenure, which I thought was cool. I had mentioned that there were several teachers over in Pennsylvania that were doing similar things, and unfortunately they had been let go because Pennsylvania didn't have tenure at the time. So, and this is kind of a Christmas Carol kind of thing. He goes, you're going to be visited tonight by 3 members of the board. And, and they did. So they show up at her house in Pittman, and they very politely say, you know, we need you to resign. And she said, I won't. She goes, am I an unfit teacher? And they said, no, you're one of the best teachers we have. I'm morally, oh no, you're absolutely wonderful. It's just a concern of the community that we're taking this action for. So she said, well, I'm not resigning, and I have tenure. And that was it. So Rachel continued with these assemblies for several years, and one of the things that she said was kind of a result, she wasn't quite sure, but every year the teachers would sign a new contract, and at the time they would get a $100 bump for that. And she said she signed her contract every year, but never got another raise. So at one point, and I don't know whether it's this interview or there was another one, but she basically came and said, Woodbury owes me $300. She kept track. So she was enjoying this very much, but thinking that maybe she should go on with her education. So she went and resigned from Woodbury and went up to New York thinking that she would continue on with her master's and all, and got very involved with that. But at the same time, I want to get sure I have the right, all these titles. I was telling Sally when we were putting this together, there were all these groups that I want to make sure I get the right thing. But, all right, wait a second. Okay. So she resigns her position, and she was the group, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, that she had been involved with several years ago, approached her and said, you know, this Woodbury Project, which is now its official title, had been very well received and was now getting some publicity. I mean, you can go into the newspapers.com archives and front page news. I mean, what she was doing, it was amazing. So she went and they said, we're going to pay for the publishing if you would go and collect this as some kind of syllabus curriculum for teachers outside of Woodbury to use, which of course she did, and she did that a lot. There are a lot of books out there where her ideas are, she collected them in a book that were available. So by 1935, the Woodbury Project was being conducted in 15 high schools. By the late 30s, many of the largest public schools in the United States had introduced some form of intercultural education, and by the 40s, Catholic and elementary schools used intercultural education in their schools throughout New York City and Chicago. The activities and syllabus were designed and released to schools, not just at the high school level, but all grade levels. And what was really neat was instead of being now these sort of standalone assemblies, they were integrated right into the curriculum. So it was now a standardized study in history, civics, and reading. So she's up in New York, and she forms a service bureau, which, again, I should have this reference of things you can listen to. She got together with the U.S. Office of Education and developed a CBS radio series called America's All, Immigrants All. And this was something that wasn't going to be played in the schools because there was a lot of that going on. But this was going to be, I think, Saturday morning or whatever, but it was available for the public. And the tapes are still available. They're a little dated, I will warn you. But again, you've got to look at, this was the 1930s at the time, so it may be appropriate at time. But the AFSC Executive Secretary, Clarence Pickett, at this point arranges for an interview with Eleanor Roosevelt. So they meet, one of the first meetings that they did, and Eleanor Roosevelt proceeds to talk in her column. She had this national newspaper column weekly, My Day, and she talks about the Woodbury Project and about Rachel, and again, these are names that she just, this is part of her network. So by the 40s, she'd finished her doctorate in educational sociology at New York University, and she was also starting to be aware of, now we're talking about kind of the wrap of World War II and what had happened previously with the Spanish-American War, that there were a lot of refugees now in the New York City school system. And because of some of the war shortages and all, there was a dearth of teachers, and the schools had a significant number of non-English speaking students, which they were totally unprepared to deal with. So she and a few other friends formed the Workshop for Cultural Democracy, and I'm going to read this specifically. People do not act according to what they know, but according to how they feel about what they know. The Neighborhood Home Festival is one means of changing feelings of antagonism and suspicion into feelings of appreciation and friendliness among members of the various racial, cultural, and religious groups found in the average American community. It's 1943. This group that the committee that she formed was kind of a response to, they realized they had this great exposure in the schools, but all the good work that they had done, kids come home and they've got adults and parents that haven't gotten the same message. So they started these neighborhood home festivals at the adult level. They were going into PTA meetings and community groups, and they would talk about these discussions, not about the fears and suspicions that were prevalent, but relating common childhood experiences. One of the things that Rachel found is that you can have this disparate group of people, but everybody has some common experiences. You know, you could ask her, what's your favorite snow day activity? What did your family do? What was your favorite Christmas experience or something, getting down to the common level. And once you got at that, then those little barriers that everybody thought about kind of went away. So they went and they took this opportunity, and a Harlem school, PS 165, which even back in the 40s was a problem. They had police intervention and all. And they came in with this concept for the kids and the adults, and really totally turned it around. So that it was documented in the book, Neighbors in Action. So one of the things that Rachel didn't realize is that this book had been picked up by the State Department. So now we're after World War II. Marshall Plan's getting underway, and they had sent 100 copies or whatever over to Germany to go, and because this talked about how groups that are now having to live together. One of the things I learned was that after the war, because you had all these people from countries that were now under Soviet control, they came west, and the Germans in West Germany were required to house these immigrant refugees, and it was causing a little bit of concern, as it might. So they had brought this over as part of their whatever, but didn't tell Rachel what was going on. So in January of '51, she gets a letter from a teacher over in Germany and says, please, would you come over and do what you do for us, because we could really use it. The book's amazing. And so the whole idea about these group conversations where you just go and try to find something common was really clicking with them. So she took a chance and forwarded the letter to the Exchange Division of the State Department. This is in January. By August, she'd been cleared by the FBI and was on a plane to Frankfurt. This was one of these, whoops. You okay? Okay. There's a sequence where one of her friends who was seeing her off at the airport, she'd always gone to Europe, but by boat. And now she's getting on a plane, which was kind of unusual, I guess, in the early 50s. And she said it was kind of like they were, saying goodbye to her, the last goodbye, because they weren't sure whether when she lifted off into the sky, they would ever see her again. So it's kind of an interesting thing. But she gets to Germany, and she goes and shares the practices that she'd been doing here in the States with the women's clubs and youth groups, PTAs, neighborhood centers, men clubs, church activities, and it was very well received. So that's going on. Gets back into the States, and again, we've got to remember, this is the 1950s, and Senator McCarthy is out there, and he calls her. She gets a letter and is asking her to testify. Now, it's not in front of the cameras, it's closed door at this point. So she contacts, I'm not sure how it was, probably somebody through the FSC, a lawyer, a friend, or whatever, and briefs her on what she should do. And they said, don't take the bait, calmly answer, their questions, don't volunteer anything you don't need to, and I'll be sitting there with you. So she goes to Washington, and she sits in front of the senators, and they start asking her questions, and she thinks, oh gosh, I was there with my papier-mâché dinosaur during World War I. I've traveled with Jane Addams, who at the time was having all sorts of issues in Chicago with the DAR and the SAR and the American Legion, and so this is obviously something that's going to come up. No, it didn't. What they found was there were 2 pieces of letterhead that had her name associated with it, and it was a group that she didn't know about, wasn't associated with, didn't have any clue, and they decided it must be a name problem. We just got the wrong Rachel Davis DuBois. So she gets back after to the lawyer's house, and he cracks up. He's dying. He goes, I can't believe this. You've got this history, you've got this network of people who are under suspicion and this, that, and the other thing, and they're talking to you about letterhead. So it's amazing. And again, if you want to read the transcript, it's all online. It's been opened up, but this is Rachel. So by the late 50s, though, she's now looking at how her success with community groups and everything. But she concluded that the Quakers needed help. So she wanted to figure out how to go and incorporate her group conversation techniques for Quakers. She goes to Pendle Hill, and she studies there. And I didn't realize, but I guess when you go and take a class at Pendle Hill, you actually have a term paper or something that you have to write afterwards. And so she goes and writes her paper, and it gets so well received that the head of the Friends General Conference, FGC. Thank you. Okay. She goes to him and says, I'd like to do this, different meetings, and she gives him total credit because she said usually what happens is, there's this deliberation process where it takes a while, but he said, go for it, and let me write you a letter of introduction. So he writes a letter to all of the East Coast meetings, and about 15 of them respond. This is up and down New England to Florida, and she goes out and does that, and it kind of builds on itself. So she eventually has introduced the Quaker dialogue process to over 500 groups in the US, Canada, Mexico, and 8 countries in Europe. For 5 years, she travels the United States conducting this method. Around this time, now we're getting into the 60s, Bayard Rustin, who is familiar with the Quaker dialogue, thank you, goes and recommends Rachel and the way she's, her activities to Martin Luther King. So in '65, Dr. King asks her to use the dialogue method in the civil rights struggle. She joins the Southern Christian Leadership Conference staff, and for 2 years she conducts workshops. And she was specific about they had to be held in people's homes, because she realized that breaking down racial barriers would only be possible if the parties were comfortable enough to invite people into their homes. This was one thing. So now she's in her 80s. It's just, like I said, it's amazing. So in '76, she's thinking about moving out of New York City, getting closer to home, closer to family. And she's down in Woodstown with a nephew and dinner. And one of the things that happened is that the nephew was friends with this new architect who just happened to study with Frank Lloyd Wright. And he and his wife had been invited to dinner to meet Aunt Rachel. So I don't want to give too much preference because Judy's going to tell the rest of the story. But basically, Rachel had this idea of what she wanted, and Joel was just willing to get involved. You want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a side of Rachel that not everybody, I think, had an opportunity to know about. She did come back with nary a dime in her pocket because money was not important to her, and she had never owned a home when she was in New York. And she had this idea that she wanted a home. She was living then with Ed Davis, who was her nephew, on what I believe, I don't know this is true, but probably part of the old Davis farm. And she needed a house. Well, my husband was starting a practice of architecture here with not nary a client. And I think the fact that he had been an apprentice with Wright made him much more appealing to Rachel. So the two of them, with not much money, hardly any budget, embarked on designing and building a house. He wanted to do design build. Well, needless to say, about halfway through, any resources had totally disappeared. There was no longer a budget. I've never really known whether Ed Davis financed the rest of the house, which I'm guessing that we lost contact, became his after Rachel passed away. I'm guessing because it was right next to his house. But anyway, they're halfway into it, no budget. And a little farther on, getting closer to her occupying this home that he had designed specifically, a tiny little house for her. It's still here.
East-facing window, so she could do her meditation
yes,
in the sunrise.
Just perfect for her.
Yeah.
He had a massive heart attack. Now, I'm going to explain to you that Rachel did not see that as anything except a little inconvenience for her. When that woman wanted something, it happened, which is probably a key to a lot of the things that happened in her life, and she very quietly made sure it happened. I wish I had recorded the telephone conversations between me and her. He's still after 2 weeks, still in Salem Hospital. And she was relentless. She was going to have that house built, and finally I just said to her, Rachel, he's had a heart attack. Give him a break. Well, the house did get finished. I don't think, if I recall rightly, that he had much to do with it. The only payment he got was a couple of prayer rugs from the Middle East. We have one.
We have one in the museum right now. Yes.
One that I believe, I wouldn't swear to it, but I believe was given to her by, I lost the name.
Margaret Mead.
Margaret Mead.
Yes.
Yeah. So I hung on to that one. But that is the story of Rachel's relentless, it's going to happen, and it did. So she spent the last years of her life in that house until she moved to the facility, looking at what she called Joel's magic window, where she could look from bed. The house was called Dawn's Edge. She could look from bed and see the sunrise and do her meditation, and a small living room where she had her living room gatherings. I had no idea I was talking to a world-renowned celebrity. I just knew I was talking to somebody who was irritating the devil out of me to get a house done, and I was busy dealing with a husband with a heart attack and a 3-year-old child.
All right, you gotta always get the rest of the story. So one of the things she also realized, and Judy talked about the gatherings, is that you couldn't turn off this. She loved communing with nature through her beautiful window. She was a lifelong in the meditation. In fact, she was also known for her headstands. So I don't know how long she kept doing those, but she would flip upside down. So she enjoyed the nature. She enjoyed spending time with the nieces and nephews and all. But that activist, that communicator, that what's next kind of thing kept gnawing at her. So she said, what needed to be done in South Jersey? And she said just how racially mixed was her community. Definitely not socially. And then she also thought about the Seabrook community. There during the war, all the Japanese, now Americans, came in, and how could she meet them? So she was having lunch with a friend and who was a poet, and she asked there if she knew anybody who did haiku. And of course her friend said, yes, of course, the guy in the AFSC accounting department does haiku, and let's get him here for lunch. So he gave her a contact name and number for someone at Seabrook, and like I said, the rest is history. So the living room gathering movement was born. It was sponsored by the New Jersey Committee for the Humanities, and this group fostered the development of intercultural understanding in the local communities. She would gather 12 to 15 people by invitation, most of whom did not know each other, and they would meet in someone's living room for 4 two-hour sessions. A facilitator would start the conversation, and she worked as the facilitator in a couple of I had an opportunity to interview one of the ladies who did it there at 7 Stars. They had a conversation there. And they would talk about universal themes, seasonal changes, school memories. One of the things I was going to say, we have another hostess. I don't know, Marie, you want to talk about your experience hosting one of Rachel's? No.
No, Rachel, she was the kind of person that she would get people to do things. She had this magic way about her. Oh yes, this is so good, so important, we have to do this. So we had the living room gatherings, and I had it at my house, and we had a black lady and an Indian lady, and Native American, and Italian, Jewish, and of course I was Quaker. So
old stock. She would talk about old stock. Yes.
We would share, like you said before, how we grew up, and then we would try to find the commonalities and the interesting things that we did as a family, maybe family vacations or what games you played as a child. Also, when I was a kid, I didn't have a TV, so we played outside all the time. So that was a common too. Because all these people some of them were older than me, so they could play outside too. They didn't have a TV either, but they did have radio. The radio was important back then.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was interesting. And the one thing that I did get to go with her up to a Quaker residence in Cherry Hill and met this darling little white-haired pretty lady who worked with Carl Jung in New York City. I mean, Rachel knew everybody. So I was in awe of this, this sweet little lady. Here, this one lady you can't hear, can't see, and they're chit-chatting away. It was really special that I got to see that.
I was going to say, and I don't know, is Charlie here? No, he's probably out. You're going to have to, during lunch, talk to Charlie about his experience during a sociology class, mentioned that he knew Rachel, and the professor said, "Oh, you do?" Was very excited, so he brought her in for show and tell. So, yeah. And he got an A, yes. So, for 2 years, from 1980 to 82, there were 26 gatherings held in 12 New Jersey communities. Over 1,200 people from Salem, Gloucester, Cumberland County participated. And there's, like I said, there's probably participants here who...
My daughter-in-law, Marcy Waddington.
Oh my gosh, yes. She talks about her in her book. And I was going to say, bring it full circle. Marcy was one of the people who, when Rachel went and finished her autobiography, had kind of a birthday party, celebration, whatever, here in the meeting. And on her 91st birthday, she completed her autobiography. And in 92, at her 100th birthday, she also, there was a celebration held here. So looking back, 2026, this is Women's History Month, and believe it or not, we didn't plan it, I don't think, but this is International Women's Day, March 8th. So what a great thing to celebrate Rachel. It was perfect timing, of course. It was all planned, right, Marie? Yes.
Her 100th birthday here, and that was really cool.
Yeah.
People that she had worked with, oh my gosh, it was a wonderful turnout of all the cultures that she had worked with over the years came to see her, and she was just blooming. And one other thing, she got to ride the 4th of July parade.
That's true, yes.
She was up for adventure, sure, let's go. And I always said, a lot of people don't have that frame of mind. No, not her. If you ask her, she'll go. If you don't want me, don't ask me.
And I was going to say, I don't know why you didn't sit all the way to the end. I don't. But that's where she used to sit. So I don't know if there's good karma there or something. But so, any sharing stories, memories? I know yes.
I never met her personally, but Joan Bryant, who's a friend of mine and is a professor of African American Studies at Syracuse University and grew up in Bridgeton, her mother was close to Rachel and hosted a number of, at least one, but maybe 4 if that's how it worked, of the gatherings at her house. Yeah. And I think Rachel met her through BOSS, which is Blacks on the South Side, and a program in Bridgeton that the American Friends Service Committee was very involved with. So anyway, I spoke with Joan this morning. She's writing an article about this, and she spoke at a Quaker history conference in England about this, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember exactly when it was, but just wanted to share that. Yeah.
It's really amazing. Like I said, back with her Woodbury Project days, obviously that was front page news in the local paper. But what confounded me was made the New York Times. I mean, it wasn't page 1, it was page 14, but there we are talking about Rachel and the Woodbury Project. They're in the Times. I don't know. I'm a New Yorker, you can tell. I get to it. All right, looks like we're good. See, isn't this perfect timing? Ye of little faith. All right, we've got lots of pictures and stuff in the museum if you want to peruse later. But thank you. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.